All right. Hi there, everyone. Good afternoon, or depending where you are in the world, good evening, good morning. I am based in Seattle, so for those of you on the West Coast, good morning. We are going to get started, and we're really glad to have you with us today. Welcome to the webinar about the Stevens Initiative's Coronavirus Pandemic Response Fund. My name is Andy Schaefer, and I'm a Senior Program Associate with the Stevens Initiative. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Assistant Director Henry Shepard and Managing Director Christine Shao. And most of my colleagues are also on and have contributed to this call. I also want to thank my colleague Phoebe Amend, who has made really significant contributions not only to the competition we're talking about today, but also this webinar. And we're really pleased to provide you with this overview of our grant competition, which we opened last Monday. So over the next 90 minutes, we are going to give an overview of the Stevens Initiative and then discuss eligibility and other rules for this competition, our current funding priorities, selection criteria, and budget and compliance rules. We will then open the floor for your questions. We have our cameras off for the presentation part of this webinar, but we will turn our cameras on for Q&A so you can see us. We have allotted about an hour for Q&A. I know that there are a lot of you joining us today, and depending on the number of questions that we receive, we may end early. So if you have a question at any time, you can type the question into the Q&A button. You can click that button at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we will work to address your question during the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, you can send us an email at stevensinitiative@aspeninstitute.org, and we will work to get to you as soon as possible. And finally, we will share at the end of this webinar a list of resources that may be helpful as you work on your application. At the same time, I am sure you all can appreciate that our team is not currently in our office, so I hope you will be forgiving if any unexpected technical issues arise on our end. If for some reason I drop off during this webinar, one of my colleagues should be able to take over pretty seamlessly. So I looked at the registration list for this webinar this morning, and I was really excited to see a lot of new individuals and institutions who are joining us today. So I want to begin today's webinar by speaking briefly about the Stevens Initiative. The Stevens Initiative aims to make international learning experiences available and accessible to an unprecedented number of young people through virtual exchange programs that connect youth in the United States with youth in the Middle East and North Africa. The initiative is a lasting tribute to Ambassador J. Christopher Stevens, who dedicated his career to building bridges between people in the United States and the MENA region. Ambassador Stevens studied in Europe during high school and college and served in the Peace Corps as a Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco. And these experiences shaped his view of the world and fueled his curiosity and prepared him to be a diplomat of goodwill, and he earned the esteem of people wherever he served. So the Stevens Initiative was conceived and developed in close partnership with Ambassador Stevens' family, and it was launched in 2015. The initiative is sponsored by the U.S. Department of State with funding provided by the U.S. government, and it is administered by the Aspen Institute. We also have additional funding provided by the Bezos Family Foundation and the governments of Morocco and the United Arab Emirates. So I mentioned that the Stevens Initiative focuses on virtual exchange. If this is a completely new concept to you, virtual exchange is using technology to connect people, young people, for education and exchange. Virtual exchange to us at the Stevens Initiative occurs among young people. It is international, and it is sustained in some way to allow for a meaningful international experience and to allow for developing global competencies, all without having to travel. We think that virtual exchange is adaptable and it can be easily integrated into any subject from science to social studies to business. Through this pandemic, we have seen firsthand how people, individuals, organizations are adapting to new ways of learning by embracing technology and the way that it can help youth. And we think that virtual exchange can bring more value to the learning experience, especially at this time. We see the Stevens Initiative as a grantor. Obviously, you are here to hear about our competition, but we are also a field builder working to grow and scale the virtual exchange field. As you can see on this slide, our work is divided into 3 pillars. These pillars of work all reinforce and strengthen each other. So our first kind of pillar of work is grant making. To date, we have given out 30 grants, which by next summer will reach about 40,000 young people in 15 countries in the Middle East and North Africa and the Palestinian territories, and in 45 US states, as well as Puerto Rico and Washington, DC. We typically run regular grant competitions every 2 years to seed and scale virtual exchange programs. And this competition, our response to the coronavirus pandemic, is an additional competition. We also act as a knowledge hub where those interested in learning about virtual exchange can find a wide range of guides, toolkits, and studies through us. And we also advocate for the virtual exchange field as a whole. Excuse me. So as you all are likely well aware, the coronavirus or COVID-19 pandemic has affected nearly every aspect of each of our lives around the world. And education and exchange activities are no exception to that disruption. We believe that tens of millions of young people have had education or exchange activities disrupted this spring and this upcoming summer due to the crisis. But we also believe that virtual exchange presents a unique opportunity at this time to help sustain learning and sustain connections among young people who are currently isolated. So last Monday, we announced a multi-step plan to address this crisis. We are providing resources to help education, exchange, and nonprofit organizations in the United States and the Middle East and North Africa conduct virtual exchange programs between these 2 regions. And today we will be discussing the grant competition, but we will also be providing links to training opportunities that we're offering, as well as those resources I mentioned at the end of the presentation. So given the disruptions caused by the pandemic, we are prioritizing making 3 different types of grants to organizations through this competition that may be looking to do any of the following. Adapt an existing in-person education or exchange program into a summer virtual exchange. So the idea is that there would be a virtual exchange program conducted during the period of performance. The second type of grant that we're offering will allow organizations to adapt and conduct an existing virtual exchange program to the current global conditions. So an example of that might be finding ways to accommodate young people learning from home, or engaging parents or guardians as facilitators or co-participants. This grant will also be dedicated to helping offset unanticipated costs for a virtual exchange program caused by the pandemic. So again, with this type of grant, the idea is that a virtual exchange would be conducted during the period of performance. The last grant type that we are offering is more of a preparatory grant. So this would provide resources to an organization to prepare for a future virtual exchange. So virtual exchange would not be conducted during the period of performance of this grant, but the application will ask you to outline your plans for future virtual exchange. So just to recap that very quickly and simply, grant type 1, a program is not yet virtual exchange and you're looking to make it a virtual exchange. With grant type 2, there's already an existing virtual exchange and you're looking to adapt it to these crisis conditions. And grant type 3, you're planning for a future virtual exchange. So we opened the competition last Monday, April 20th. We are accepting applications and making funding decisions on a rolling basis until the final day by which you can submit an application, which is June 12th, 2020 at 8:00 p.m. Eastern Time. The maximum period of performance for these grants is from June 1st through August 31st of this year. We strongly encourage applicants to propose a period of performance start date no earlier than 30 days after you submit an application to allow for review and contracting time. Grants awarded can range between $20,000 and $100,000. Please note that applying organizations cannot request more than 40% of their 2019 fiscal year operating budget. The application is located on SurveyMonkey Apply. There is a link to the website on this slide, and we will also be sharing it after this webinar. You can also find that link on our website, stevensinitiative.org, if you do not already have it. I want to make note of some important restrictions on who is eligible to apply and receive these grants. Organizations must be based in the United States or in the Middle East or North Africa. You can find a list of these countries and places on the State Department website in the Near Eastern Affairs Bureau. US-based applicants must be tax-exempt, nonprofit organizations, including educational institutions. And MENA region-based applicants must be nonprofit organizations, including educational institutions as well, that can demonstrate current in-country registration. Other organizations are not eligible to apply, though they may be included as subawardees or contract recipients on a grant, and I'll touch briefly on those categories in just a few minutes. Staff should be proficient in English, able to file reports and conduct evaluations in English as well as in Arabic or French as appropriate with your program. Past and current recipients of Stevens Initiative grants or of U.S. Department of State funds are indeed eligible to submit applications if proposed work is different from previously funded activities and doesn't involve any overlap in staff, curriculum, or participants. The activities in your proposal must be conducted in the United States and in one or more of the countries that are listed on this slide. So that means that every program must include young people both in the United States as well as in one of these countries. Programs may include refugees from these countries who are not currently in one of these listed countries. These programs are eligible and will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. So if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to us. Applicants who are applying for the first two types of grants that I described, the grants in which virtual exchange programs will take place this summer during the period of performance, can propose programs that reach participants at an age range that corresponds with the elementary school, middle school, high school, undergraduate, and graduate education levels, as well as young professionals under the age of 35. Youth participants must participate in at least 2 hours and no more than 20 hours of a combination of synchronous, which means real time, and or asynchronous virtual exchange activities over the course of the program. Communication must also occur in a sustained way, meaning that we want to see programs in which participants are interacting with their international peers in some way more than once. We have outlined in the call for proposals the expectations of grantees should your proposal be funded. Grantees will be required to submit a final financial and progress report after the period of performance. Grantees are expected to conduct a program evaluation. The evaluation requirements will differ based on the type of grant for which you are applying. So we encourage you to review the application on SurveyMonkey Apply and reach out to us with any specific questions if you haven't done so already. We welcome collaboration with grantees to collect and share stories and media related to the funded programs as opportunities arise. So we might contact grantees to discuss these opportunities. And lastly, we require all grantees to share limited participant contact information for enrollment in the Stevens Initiative Alumni Network, which includes a connection with the Department of State's International Exchange Alumni Network. If this requirement does not align with an applicant's program, there is space for you in the application to note that. I am now going to touch on the actual application and selection criteria. So proposed projects are encouraged to focus on any of the following topics: tech and computing, world affairs and global studies, business and entrepreneurship, language learning and practice, or public health and or the coronavirus pandemic. We realize that these are sometimes overlapping topics, but we think it's very important for applicants to identify which of these topics is the primary focus of their proposal and not to spread attention too thin over these various topics. We don't think that the program is necessarily stronger if it's, touching on all of these topics, but all of these listed topics we identify as being priorities that will help young people in the United States, as well as in the Middle East and North Africa, build the skills and understanding that they need to succeed in the workforce. The Stevens Initiative is committed to reaching young people whose access to exchange programs has been limited and to reaching diverse participants. You'll see some of the demographics listed here. We note that populations with diverse backgrounds and limited resources are among those who have been most severely impacted by the pandemic. And so we advise that a strong proposal will explain how young people from these populations whose access to international experiences or exchange is limited even in the best of circumstances. And we want to see how that will be a priority for outreach and inclusion in the proposed program. There are 6 selection criteria that an independent review committee will use to score proposals that the initiative receives. These criteria include assessing the need for the proposed program during this time of crisis, the feasibility of implementing the program activities, the cost effectiveness of the program. And when I say that, we are prioritizing making grants to organizations that are using existing resources well, so that Stevens Initiative funding is augmenting and improving plans or existing programs rather than serving as the sole resource for a program. That's not necessarily as applicable to those of you who are applying to that grant type 3, that kind of preparatory grant. For those grants, we're prioritizing funding proposals in which costs are suitable and appropriate given the number of the projected number of beneficiaries once the virtual exchange is launched. The last 3 selection criteria include the applicant's capacity to conduct the program, the proposed content and plan for activities, and the plan to prioritize reaching diverse participants in an equitable way. So in order to apply for funding, applications may only be submitted online through our online application system, SurveyMonkey Apply. Again, we will share that link with you if you do not have it already. Applicants must do the following in order for an application to be considered complete. So you have to complete and submit the application form. You must upload a budget, which I'll talk a little bit more about in just a minute. You must upload a program or project plan, and you must upload a foreign or domestic subrecipient questionnaire. Those last 3 bullets that are listed on your screen right now have templates that are included in the online application. So make sure when you're going through this process that you fully submit your application. It's kind of a 2-step process, so double check that you have actually submitted your application once it is entirely complete. And if you would like to view the full application before you complete it, you can download a PDF of both the call for proposals as well as the different applications from the landing page on SurveyMonkey Apply. So as I mentioned earlier, once you submit an application through SurveyMonkey Apply, an independent review committee of experts will review and score proposals that we receive. We aim to make decisions as soon as possible given the very short period of application in this competition as well as the short period of performance. Applicants will be notified of funding decisions. And if a proposal is selected for funding, Stevens Initiative will grant conditional approval and will initiate a negotiations and contracting phase. I'm going to go through a few slides on budget and compliance that hopefully will be helpful as you think about building out the budget for your applications. So as I mentioned earlier, our funding comes from the Department of State, and as such, our funds are governed by very specific regulations, which you can see outlined in this slide. These regulations are listed within the Uniform Guidance, which is basically a United States government-wide framework for grants management. You may wish to familiarize yourself with these regulations as you build out your budget. This next slide is meant to highlight that the Aspen Institute is the managing partner of the Stevens Initiative and is considered a pass-through entity of federal funds. So if your program is approved for funding, you will technically become a subrecipient to the Aspen Institute and will therefore be required to adhere to the guidance mentioned, in those previous slides. As you think about your budget, note that any costs that you propose should align with the proposal and meet the following criteria. Those costs should be allowable, reasonable, allocable, and necessary to conduct the activities outlined in the proposal. So allowable means that those costs adhere to the federal cost principles and have consistent treatment to widely accepted accounting practices. Reasonable means that an objective individual would agree that the cost is appropriate for the work proposed. That cost must be able to withstand public scrutiny, and it is, again, necessary to complete the proposed work. And allocable means that the cost incurred supports the work outlined in the award, and again, it's necessary to conduct the work. On this next slide, we have a few examples of both some disallowed costs and some allowable costs. Examples of disallowed costs are entertainment costs, as well as any alcohol expenses. Some examples of allowable costs are personnel and fringe, facilitator and educator support and stipends, professional development, technology fees, curriculum development and maintenance, just to name a few that may be germane to a virtual exchange program. The next slide outlines the main cost categories in your budget. Any activity or cost that is proposed must fall under one of these cost categories. So some questions that will be helpful for you to think about, because it might be the bulk of your budget request, is what personnel are essential to carrying out the program and what percentage of their time is needed. We encourage you to think about your implementing partners and begin those discussions around what it will take on their end to help successfully implement the program as well. So again, these cost categories are personnel, participant support, supplies, contractual, and subaward. Noting here that there's a difference between these two buckets of work. So if you have any questions about this, you can feel free to reach out to us and we can explain that difference in a little more detail. But I also encourage you to take a look at the FAQs that are listed on SurveyMonkey Apply, because we have a pretty helpful checklist there to determine whether a partner or entity should be considered a subawardee or a contractor. The next category will be other direct costs. And finally, we have the indirect cost category, sometimes known as your NICRA or your overhead cost. So indirect costs are sometimes referred to as overhead costs. If you have a negotiated indirect cost rate, also known as a NICRA, between your organization and the US federal government, the Aspen Institute, as the managing partner, is required to acknowledge your NICRA. If you don't have a NICRA and you have never received one from the federal government, you are automatically eligible to receive the 10% de minimis rate. And if you do not want to elect the 10% de minimis rate, you may elect to negotiate a rate with the Aspen Institute. So if you have questions about that process, please see the FAQs section on SurveyMonkey Apply, and you can also reach out to us. This last slide touches on cost share, basically says that it is voluntary, and if you decide to include it on your budget, it must contain allowable costs and be verifiable from your financial records. So before we wrap up the presentation portion of today's webinar, I wanted to mention a few different resources available for applicants after we leave today's webinar. So as part of our overall response efforts to the pandemic, we are also offering training and mentoring opportunities for organizations looking to learn more about what comprises an effective virtual exchange program, give organizations kind of the building blocks to understand good virtual exchange. If you have made it all the way through this webinar and have determined that your organization is not eligible to apply for funding, you can still register for these training sessions. And you can register for all of these opportunities on the events page of our website. Again, that's stevensinitiative.org. The first session is scheduled for tomorrow, April 29th at 12 p.m. US Eastern Time. We host a list of resources on our website. These curated resources include toolkits, publications, videos, webinars, and other tools that can be helpful to you as you consider implementing virtual exchange and as you're looking to adapt to online learning. We have also created and are regularly updating a frequently asked questions document on SurveyMonkey Apply, so you can find a PDF of that, which will continue updating on the SurveyMonkey Apply landing page. We are about to start the Q&A portion of this webinar, but if you have any additional questions that are unanswered after today's session, you can email us at stevensinitiative@aspeninstitute.org. So very briefly, a couple of reminders. Applications are accepted on a rolling basis until June 12th. You must complete your application on SurveyMonkey Apply. And you can learn more by visiting our website. We'll also include a link to this information in an email, and which we will plan to send shortly after today's presentation. So thank you very much for joining and listening to all of that. This concludes the presentation portion of today's webinar. So we are now going to start the Q&A portion. We're going to turn the PowerPoint off and turn our cameras on. So again, any questions that you have, you can add to the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and we will work to answer those now. Hello, everyone. All right, so I am going to start answering some questions. Let's see. Will you accept more than one application from an eligible organization? The answer to that question is yes, so long as the proposed work is different and that the applications do not overlap in terms of staff time or participants. The next question is, we are thinking of adapting a virtual exchange program, which was funded by the Stevens Initiative that just ended. Would that be grant 2 or 3? That question is referring to like the grant types 2 or 3. I think the answer to that question will depend on what you're proposing to do. Again, with those grant types 1 and 2, virtual exchange will be conducted this summer during the period of performance. If you're just looking to propose preparatory activities for future virtual exchange, that would be grant type 3. So I think that that will depend on what you're proposing to do. Let's see. This next question says, for grant type 2, can you explain the grant duration time frame? Is the grant meant to fund implementation costs solely? Because the virtual exchange program and administration plan includes some setup activities. So are pre-implementation costs also eligible for funding? This is a good question. We anticipate that there will be some startup work and some startup costs that are required to launch a program, even if it's a brief abbreviated summer program. So generally, pre-implementation costs are eligible for funding and are understandable as you're building out both your budget and your plan for activities. And in fact, we'll want to see what those pre-implementation activities are. The next question is, can you talk a bit more about the parameters or guidelines for grant type 3? So that is the preparatory style of grant in which virtual exchange will not be happening during the period of performance. What we will want to see with this application, I think a lot of it rests in that project plan template that's provided for you. We are primarily looking to see activities that will prepare an organization and individuals to conduct future virtual exchange. So this could include facilitator training, this could include partnership development, this could include curriculum development. So that's kind of the preparation aspect of that grant. The other side of it is getting an understanding of the proposed program that you're looking to conduct in the future. We'll want to see information about how you will think about building out a future virtual exchange. We also have another question about that grant type 3. Is it only for a summer program? If the period for the proposal development is June 1st through August 31st, could the proposal be for a program that would take place in the fall or spring of 2020 to 2021? Just to clarify on the answer to this question, the period to submit an application is now through June 12th. And so the actual grant will take place between the maximum period of June 1st through August 31st. So that proposal can indeed be for work that will be done to prepare for future virtual exchange. So whether that future virtual exchange is happening in the fall of 2020 or in the spring of 2021, that is okay. But the thought is that the grant will be implemented this summer for those preparatory activities. The next question says, how does the initiative define contact hours for virtual exchange programs? If the overall program curriculum also contains solo activities such as reading and writing assignments or listening to recorded lectures, how do those count toward the 20-hour limit? Thank you for this question. When we say contact hours, we mean young people from the United States interacting with young people from the Middle East and North Africa. So it's very understandable that a program might include other activities that are not kind of those contact between peers, that cross-cultural communication or collaboration. So those kind of individual activities like reading or listening to recorded lectures would not count toward that 20-hour limit or would not count toward those contact hours, but are perfectly reasonable activities to include into your plan, as long as your plan includes this cross-cultural collaboration and communication element to it as well. The next question I'm seeing says, is environmental and climate literacy a good fit for this competition in terms of topics? That That is a great question, and I would say that that is an allowable topic to propose. So go forth. We like seeing topics around the environment and sustainability. Are you looking for an ideal number of participants for the programs? Thank you for this question. We are not setting any limits for participants in this competition, neither a floor nor a ceiling. We understand that circumstances are very different this summer and different with education institutions and organizations. So we don't have any limits on the number of participants. Again, like I mentioned, we are looking at cost effectiveness as a selection criteria. So as long as a proposal is looking to use resources well, and if it is proposing virtual exchange is using resources well to reach a large number of young people, then that is appropriate. We also had another similar question about numbers, so hopefully that answered that question as well, but let us know if that did not. The next question is, when you say there cannot be overlap between staff working for State Department grants and this grant, is it okay if the effort of the staff is clearly delineated? For example, someone working half-time on a State Department grant and half-time on a Stevens Initiative grant. I think the answer to that question, again, will depend on what is being proposed and what overlap with actual activities there may be. So I think if you have specific questions about that, you should reach out to us and we can maybe help provide some clarity. The next question is, in one of the slides, it said we could not use staff of previous or current Stevens Initiative funded programs. If the Stevens Initiative funded program is over, can we use people who were part of the previous Stevens Initiative funded program? The answer to that is yes. Our next question is about contact hours again. Contact hours should include virtual exchange between US participants and MENA participants. Does virtual exchange between participants from various countries other than the US count? For example, a Jordanian and a Tunisian speaking with each other, not an American and Jordanian talking to each other. That's a great question. For the purposes of this grant and our funding, American participants and MENA participants must engage and interact with each other. We have funded programs in the past in which additional interregional communication occurs either in the United States or in the Middle East and North Africa, and that is great and allowable, but the proposed program must also include United States and MENA exchange. Excuse me. We have a question about costs per participant. What is the general range of cost per participant expected for this grant? If you have partook in any way in some of our previous competitions, we have set an allowable cost per participant. We have not done that in this competition. Again, assessing the cost effectiveness of a program is one of our selection criteria, but we are not setting any kind of a cost per participant range. we encourage organizations to use resources well and to use resources in a way where Stevens Initiative funding is augmenting or helping to support an existing program, if that's what your application is calling for. But we don't have any ranges set for this competition. The next question is, would meeting costs such as food for a student gathering be an allowable cost? I believe the answer to that is yes, and Christine will yell at me if I'm wrong. But that is an allowable cost. Thank you.
Andy, can I just add to that really
Yes.
quickly? I would say one thing we've noticed if you're planning on doing a student gathering of some sort is to also make sure that that gathering, potentially if it's necessary for the virtual exchange, happens on kind of both sides of the exchange, or there's some sort of virtual component connecting the two. It's just a thought.
Thank you. Let's see. This next question asks, will a proposal be better regarded if a foreign partner is already identified? Would a sub-RFP in a multi-campus higher ed institution be advisable for this grant, or is it better to start with predetermined programs? This is a good question, and it's a little tricky to answer because this, I think, will depend entirely on the applying organization and the plans that they outline. We acknowledge that this is a very short application period and also a very short period of performance. So there's little room that's, you know, kind of left to start completely from scratch. But if an applicant can demonstrate their plans to bring partners on that are brand new, we will of course consider that. So we will defer to the applying organizations, you know, taking into mind the very, very short application period and period of performance. At the very least, having really firm plans in the application for how those partners will be cultivated and brought on will be key to receiving, you know, good scores in the proposal. This next question is, does the planning have to be complete by August 31st for grant type 3? That is a great question. The answer is not necessarily. We will be in touch with grantees as you complete your period of performance, and you will be required to submit a final application. So we'll be able to kind of see where you're at. But implementing a virtual exchange is often kind of a ever shifting and dynamic activity with refining and reworking. So this does not have to be set in stone by the time your application, by the time your period of performance is over. But we will want to see progress made toward those plans during your period of performance. See, this next question says, double checking that the period of performance could begin 30 days after the proposal submission date, not accounting for additional processing time. Yes, we encourage applicants to propose a period of performance that begins no sooner than 30 days after you submit your proposal to account for scoring and processing time. I hope that answers your question, but let us know if it doesn't.
Andy, do you think potentially it could also be referring to the contracting piece? I don't know if I'm reading too much into that and I can't see the question anymore, but all of that is to say that we have a contract that we will want to sign with the applicant, and there's a period where it does take some time to actually have it signed, and it would be okay for activities to begin so long as that there's an understanding that we're working on the contract. And I'm sorry if I misunderstood the question, but I hopefully that adds a little bit clarity to it as well.
That's helpful. Thank you. Let's see. There's a question about grant type 3. Will the same end date apply, and will there be opportunities to move from the planning to the doing phase? This is a great question. For right now, the period of performance for those grants will also end, excuse me, on August 31st of this year. We are keeping our eyes on the pandemic as it kind of evolves, and we will be assessing, you know, if there are needs for additional funding opportunities in the future. So at this very moment, there are not opportunities to move forward, but we will be assessing and you know, maybe looking to do additional things, whether that's funding or otherwise, as the pandemic evolves. We also still have regular grant competitions, so those will still very much occur as well. The next question is, as applications are accepted on a rolling basis, what is the expected timeline from application to notification of selection status? Thanks for this question. I think this will depend a little bit just based on vetting these proposals, in addition to being reviewed by our independent review committee, must also be reviewed by the Department of State. So there's a couple of different steps of review, but we are working to make decisions as soon as humanly possible, acknowledging the very tight turnaround, the short period of performance. So we hope to make our decisions very quickly, and that's why we suggested that 30-day window excuse me, for proposing your start period of performance. Christine, this is a question for you. Our organization was founded at the end of May 2019 and has a fiscal year from August to July. Therefore, our FY 2019 actuals is only a little over 2 months long and much smaller than our FY 2020 budget, which runs 12 months. Are we able to request 40% of our FY 2020 budget instead of our FY 2019 actuals, since they don't represent a full year?
We have made those exceptions in the past for new organizations. I would say simply yes, but I would also upload additional information in SurveyMonkey Apply, where I think there's an option, right, Andy, where you can upload more documents, and I would still outline kind of when you became incorporated or when your organization was like formalized, include what the FY 2019 actuals were, and then your full 2020 budget. That should be enough for us to make a judgment call on how to move forward.
Thanks for that. We have a question about grant type 3. How will the Stevens Initiative help in mentoring faculty and staff if the project is on track? If it's in track 3. This is a great question, and I hopefully have some good answers for you, which will help answer the next question I'm seeing as well, which is about those training and mentoring sessions and if they'll be recorded. So as I mentioned during our our presentation portion of the webinar, we are offering kind of external training and mentoring tracks that are being offered by experts in the virtual exchange field. And if this is of interest to the organization that asked this question, there will be opportunities to sign up for those training sessions, which are listed on our website, stevensinitiative.org. Those training sessions will also include time for Q&A with participants, and we will also be opening in the coming, excuse me, in the coming days and weeks, opportunities to sign up both for small kind of breakout sessions on some specific topics from these trainings, as well as one-on-one mentoring sessions. Again, these are with the external experts who we have brought on to lead these trainings and mentorship sessions. In addition, we are happy as grantors to work with our grantees in a really close capacity to help ensure the success of a program. So if you receive that Type 3 grant, and if you're working through things, you'll have the resources of our kind of external trainers and mentors available, and you will also have us available to help think through anything. So we will be as helpful as we can be if you receive that grant. And to answer the other individual's question about the training and mentoring sessions, yes, those sessions will be recorded, and they will be shared on the Stevens Initiative's YouTube page. We have a question about eligible organizations. When you say eligible organizations are nonprofits, including educational institutions, that would or would that not include a municipal school district, public schools, or a private university? Christine, I hope that you will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe both of those categories are eligible to apply for funds. Great. Excuse me. The next question is about synchronous and asynchronous programming. This is a great question. Is there a preference for applications that combine synchronous and asynchronous? Being located in Seattle, the time difference can make it challenging to do synchronous programming. Well, I can definitely relate to that because I am also located in Seattle and I work with an organization based on the East Coast, so I feel you. There is not a preference, and we appreciate the question. Organizations that are submitting applications will be best positioned to understand their partners and their participants. Excuse me, and we will defer to their judgment on what will actually be feasible and what will work best. We have funded programs in the past that are 100% synchronous. We have funded programs in the past that are 100% asynchronous, and we funded programs that combine the two. So there's not a preference on, you know, the nature of those activities, whether they're synchronous or asynchronous. We will be looking more at what's feasible for the program and what's feasible for the partners and participants who are involved. The next question is, excuse me, we would like to develop an online extra curriculum for Jordanian students. Can that be covered by the grant? If yes, under which category of grants will that be? I think the answer to this question will depend on what the curriculum is that you're looking to develop. If it is for a virtual exchange program, then it seems like that might be covered under the grant type 3 application, that kind of preparatory grant. But I think this will depend on whether or not this is a curriculum for for virtual exchange. I'm not exactly clear, but please feel free to follow up if I can help clarify my answer on that. Christine, I have another question for you. Can you talk a little bit about the foreign and domestic subrecipient questionnaire?
Yeah, it's a good question. So normally the questionnaires I shouldn't say normally, they're used to assess the applicant's capacity to manage a federal grant. And so we ask questions about if you've ever received a federal grant before, the grant size amount, but we also ask more fundamental questions that allow us to assess your organization's internal controls. So we ask questions about whether or not there's a system for processing payroll, whether you have accounting and finance policies or grant monitoring policies, things that are going to give us insight and some level of comfortability in awarding a grant to you. If this were the sort of like normal grant competition and the period of performance would be longer, it would also be used to inform the frequency of which we would be requiring you to submit invoices to us. So yeah, it's a little bit of both. It helps us assess risk, but also just gives us a fundamental understanding of your organization's internal control capacity.
Thank you for that. The next question is, can you please go over the priority demographics again? Sure, I can just kind of say those out loud. We're committed to reaching young people whose access to exchange programs has been limited and to reaching diverse participants, which includes women and girls, underserved youth whose access to international exchange has been limited, refugees, persons with disabilities, and minority groups. So I hope that was helpful. The next question asks, does increasing the number of partners beyond one primary increase competitiveness of the application? I can try to answer this question. The way that our grants work, we will only be giving a grant to a primary organization. We can only kind of give our grants to one primary applicant. So we won't be able to split that up between organizations. If this question is asking whether it strengthens a proposal to have many partners involved, the answer is not necessarily. Again, we have funded programs that have just been bilateral, one US institution and one MENA institution. We've also funded programs that are multilateral. So we will be willing to review proposals that have very few or very many partners, and we will be scoring them based on feasibility as well. So feasibility of being able to program with all of these partners, take into account some of the logistical challenges that may arise with multiple partners. This next question asks, what if there isn't an existing in-person, I think this means in-person exchange with any of the allowed countries? Could we create a brand new virtual exchange based on old partnerships? If I'm understanding that question correctly, the answer is yes. You can create a brand new virtual exchange based on old partnerships. That's completely allowable. Let's see. We have a lot of great questions coming in, and I am trying to keep up with them. But if we are not able to get to your question today, we will work to answer, or you can follow up with us after. We have another question. We have a couple of questions on grant type 3. So for type 3 grants, can funds be used for paid professional development opportunities, training, for example, trainings, workshops, and conferences? The answer to that is yes, so long as they meet those kind of budgetary requirements. They're allowable, they're allocable, they're necessary for the work to be conducted. The next question about grant type 3, if the due date for proposals is June 12th, must the VE implementation be completed by the end of August? Or can the VE proposal for a project, oh, excuse me, can the virtual exchange proposal be for a project that occurs in the fall and spring of 2020 and 2021? For grant type 3, there will not be any virtual exchange that happens during the period of performance. So there will not need to be any virtual exchange implementation that occurs by the end of August. Our thought is that this will go toward preparing for a future virtual exchange. So it's completely allowable that the virtual exchange that you're looking to build upon receiving this grant type 3 will occur in the fall of 2020 or the spring of 2021. Let's see. Is initial commitment or coordination with the MENA region partners required or recommended to submit a proposal for a type 3 planning grant? I imagine that this question has come up for folks considering all 3 types of grants. So as I mentioned earlier, it's not absolutely necessary, but we do acknowledge that we have a very short period for applications to be submitted, and we have a pretty short period of performance. So we encourage applications to very clearly explain how partners will be brought on if they're not already on board in a timely and efficient way. Someone asked, tell us again who to contact with specific questions for grant type 3. You can contact us. Our email, which we will email you from as a thank you for participating in this webinar later, is stevensinitiative@aspeninstitute.org. The next question is, do you have recommendations for those of us whose applications could reasonably fall under multiple grant types? I think if you have questions about that, you should reach out to us to clarify, but you know, to kind of break this up very specifically, grant type 1, you'd be taking an existing in-person program, either education or exchange, and converting it to a virtual exchange. With grant type 2, you're adapting an existing virtual exchange to the current, you know, kind of crisis conditions. And then for grant type 3, you would just be preparing an organization or individuals to conduct future virtual exchange. There will likely be some preparatory activities for either grant type 1 or grant type 2, but the thought is with both of those grants, virtual exchange will be conducted during the period of performance.
Andy, could I add something to that? Or maybe it's more of a question to you. Do you think it's fair to say to that organization that they should really look internally kind of at their own needs and what they want to achieve through X grant? And I think making that self-assessment internally is really, really important. And that should be the main driver on where they think they're going to find the most kind of success in submitting an application. Sorry, that was a question, but also a comment. Either way, it's out there.
Yes, I definitely agree. It seems reasonable that, you know, depending on what you're looking to propose, hopefully it should be pretty clear which of the three types of grants you're looking to apply for. But if you still have questions, you can definitely contact us. Christine, maybe you can help me out with this one as well. Can we include budgeting for personnel who are based on the ground in the Middle East and North Africa to support our coordination efforts with our partner organization? The answer to that is yes. This person is asking specifically about Libya, and so I'm not sure if there are any additional, you know, kind of complexities with that.
There may be some complexities in terms of the payment and how that would actually work, but that's something that we could work closely on and figuring out if that was a key component kind of to the virtual exchange program. And it sounds like having a coordinator is a very smart thing. We could work closely on figuring out how we might administer the payment, and of course lean on our Department of State colleague as well for any guidance that they might have.
I'm seeing a couple of budgeting and subrecipient questionnaire questions come in. So another one for you, Christine. This organization is noting that their policy states that reviews are conducted every 2 years, and every third year there are audits. So they're wondering if this is acceptable for the subrecipient questionnaire, or if the Stevens Initiative and the Aspen Institute requires audits every year.
We will, whatever your organization's policy is what we will follow as well. So there will not be a requirement that you have an annual audit. That's not what your organizational policy is. I will say that we would like to see, at the very least, your unaudited financial statements. I'm assuming that you do an annual close every single year, so we would like to see that. And then, of course, the actual official audit after it's complete. After 2 years, we want to see that. But I just remember that these are very short grants, so that wouldn't apply here. But in any case, yes, unaudited financial statements would be okay. And if you have audited financials only 2 years, that's also okay.
For that. Another one, Christine, maybe, I know that you've run into this question in the past about like education organizations abroad. So this question asks, can you please clarify if private for-profit language schools in Morocco are eligible to participate in this program?
I think eligible to participate is right. Could they be the prime recipient of these funds? I'm leaning more towards no. But I tried to acknowledge this in the info session I did last week, but I didn't answer it very well. But I would say that I understand that the sort of status of what makes a nonprofit or a for-profit might be different varying on countries. And so if there was some flexibility for us to interpret what that meant, we could look at it that way. But across the board, I would say they couldn't receive direct funds from us. That's where I'm going with that one. Yeah.
Thanks for that. The next question is also about the North Africa region. Are there any grants for the North Africa region, and how can we apply? So organizations that are based in North Africa are indeed eligible to apply for this funding in exactly the same way as we've kind of described during this presentation today via our SurveyMonkey Apply website. You can submit your application there. The next question is about participants. Do all or the majority of virtual exchange participants have to be under the age of 35, including participants from both countries? Um, the answer to this question is yes, the majority of participants should be under the age of 35, should be what we consider young people. We also acknowledge that programs that might work with community colleges, for example, may include non-traditional students who may not necessarily be under age 35, and that's completely fine. We acknowledge that, and that is acceptable. But the program should focus on reaching young people who would fit between that kind of elementary age to young professional age. This next question is about the grant type 3. If a proposal focuses on faculty development this summer, does the contact information to be shared with the State Department International Exchange Alumni Database extend to providing contact info for the students who participate in the resulting virtual exchanges? I think the answer to that for right now will be no, because those participants would not be funded by the State Department if this is that grant type 3. So your grant would be doing those preparatory activities, and then the exchange happens later on. I think for right now, the answer to that would be no, since those participants would not be funded by the Stevens Initiative or by proxy by the Department of State. Let's see. We have a couple of questions about evaluation that Henry, maybe you can join in and help me answer. Are there any expectations for monitoring and evaluating? What percentage of the overall project budget should be allocated to M&E? To speak very briefly about this, we are requiring grantees to conduct program monitoring and evaluation. The monitoring and evaluation requirements will differ based on the type of grant for which you are applying. So we encourage you to take a look at the application and SurveyMonkey apply to familiarize yourself with those requirements, and then let us know if you have any additional questions about those requirements. And Henry, maybe you can talk a little bit about project budget and allocation to monitoring and evaluation.
Thanks, Andy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I think that we, frankly, are leaving this to the discretion of applicants to determine what's suitable for their program, given that we know that the mix of Stevens Initiative funding and existing resources and other support are very hard to predict given the nature of what we have planned here. So we would just encourage folks to think about what's reasonable and appropriate for the scale of activities that will be conducted. And if they have any questions, to please follow up with us, and we'll try to give the best thoughts we can on a one-off basis.
Thank you. I have another question for you about evaluation. For grant type 2 expectations, we are focused on serving youth from home while schools continue to be disrupted. Is it possible to explore adapting evaluation needs and tools to the current context? And if so, is this something we should note in our application or communicate in another way?
To be honest, I don't think that adapting evaluation methods would be at the very top of our list of things to fund right now. But with that being said, if this were a grant type 1 or 2, and adapting evaluation methods did seem like a very effective and also cost-effective step to take, I think we would certainly be open to it if it were well articulated. So I also know that we are expecting certain kinds of evaluation from grant type 2, which are listed in the call for proposals. So you'd want to make sure that what you were proposing was consistent with that as well. I know that our main emphasis is on reaching as many young people as we can at this very difficult time, and evaluation could be an important part of overall growth in the field. But for us, it wouldn't be the first thing we'd hope to see investment in at this time.
Thanks, Henry. Our next question asks, is it possible to allocate funds to faculty as course development grants for courses to be implemented in the fall? I see that this was a question about grant type 2, but I think this might also be applicable for grant type 3. The answer is yes, it is possible to allocate funds to faculty as kind of course development grants, or as a stipend for course development. Let's see. Okay, I'm looking at this next question, which mentions that this organization's programs focus on Arabic language education for K-12 students in the US. They mention that the virtual exchange component will support US students building Arabic language skills. Is it important that we also include a portion of the virtual exchange that would build MENA students' skills, not just the US students' skills? For example, by conducting portions in English for them to practice their English language skills? Or is it sufficient to have the virtual exchange focused, I think, solely on building the US students' Arabic skills? This is a really good question. We believe that virtual exchanges should offer some kind of a benefit to participants on all sides of the exchange. We have seen, and we don't necessarily think that that benefit needs to be exactly the same. So we have even seen, programs where one side is doing one thing and another side is doing another thing, and they're coming together and collaborating on something specific, but they might be working on totally different, subject matter or different courses. So I think while it may be fine to have a language focused exchange, it seems like it will be important to note in your application that there will be a benefit for this exchange for the participants who are based in the Middle East and North Africa, whether that is English language practice in the context of this specific question, or if it's some other kind of a benefit or incentive for them to participate. Keep in mind that we are, one of the selection criteria for these grants is addressing the need for this program based on the populations who are being proposed to be reached. So a strong proposal will note the need for this program on kind of all sides of the exchange. We have another question about grant type 3. I'll take this question, and then maybe I'll see if I can answer one more before we wrap up. We are applying for funding that will enable our staff to do virtual exchange in general. Do we need to have a specific exchange in mind that we are aiming to implement? The answer to that is yes. When completing your proposal, we will want to see your plans for a future virtual exchange. This does not need to be set in stone. We acknowledge that things will change either over time or given what you learned during your kind of preparatory activities. So we'll want to see a general idea of what you're looking to conduct, while also being flexible and acknowledging that this might change shape a little bit over time. We have a couple of questions that maybe I'll close on. A couple of questions about our next grant competition, our next kind of regular grant competition. We are hoping to launch our next grant competition at some point in the future, but we are, kind of holding off on any future competitions with the exception of this one for right now, given the current global situation. So hopefully we will be able to follow up with the community about that soon, but for right now, this is our kind of only competition that we're focusing on. I know that there are some questions that we were not able to get to. I really thought that we would not need a full hour for Q&A, but these are all really good questions. I hope that they were all helpful to you. I know that we are at time, so if your question was not answered, we will work to follow up with you, or we encourage you to get in touch with us. We will be posting a recording of this webinar to our Stevens Initiative YouTube page. And so please feel free to reach out to us as you complete your applications and as any questions arise. Thank you so much for taking the time today. We're wishing you the very best, and please take care. Thank you.